great. So we can see you. Fantastic. So it's kind of a very international group. We have quite a few Chinese students who are joining us through our virtual student exchange program. And so they can sign up from their home institution and take a course here at Osaka University. So it's an and maybe they're very curious to know a little bit about journalism across the world. And so it's really great that you're with us today, Ilaria. And I should say that Ilaria is based at Monash University in Australia, and you're a journalist by training. Is that right?
Sort of, yeah, more of a sort of strategist and manager. But yes, my background is both in academic publishing and also journalism. So I started out as an editor in academic publishing. So I worked for a publisher called Wiley Blackwell, and then later moved into a publisher called Springer Nature, which publishes Nature magazine, Scientific American, and that sort of thing. So two very big global publishers. And then after that, I moved to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, which is Australia's version of the BBC. And my focus there was in international broadcasting. So that's sort of more like the BBC World Service or Deutsche Welle or CNN Asia. And my area of interest was the Indo-Pacific region, with a specific focus on the Pacific, because we're in Australia, the Pacific island nations are our neighbours, and they're increasingly of interest to a lot of people because they sit geographically in between China and America. So a lot of scholars and a lot of people are increasingly interested in that Southeast Asia and the Pacific region. Yeah.
And then sorry, go on. You haven't finished.
I was just going to finish, and then sort of saying eventually I found a way to combine these two discrete areas of interest by joining Monash University, leading a journalism project called 360 Info, which, as I'll be able to explain, really combines those two areas of interest in scholarly publishing and in the research being done in universities, and my interest in the media, particularly the international media.
Fantastic. And I noticed you were with Lonely Planet for a while.
That was the best job I ever had. These guys are all too young to really know about Lonely Planet. It's only us old people that know about Lonely Planet. But Lonely Planet used to be a very, very famous publishing company that focused on travel, and its focus was on intrepid travel. So it was kind of independent travelers who went off the beaten path, who were sort of exploring places that were difficult to get to. And they published these guidebooks, which are most people don't use them now because everybody uses digital media when planning their trips, but it was full of true believers. It was full of people, including me, that really believed that traveling was the best way to bridge cultural divides and the best way to really experience another culture rather than just reading about it. So it was a wonderful job. I loved it.
You didn't by any chance meet Kit Williams there, did you?
Were they an author?
She produced a series for Lonely Planet on Going Bush. One of the famous Australian athlete was going around Australia, and Kit was filming that. So Kit's actually going to give a talk on this course a couple of weeks from now. And so she had her time at Lonely Planet as well.
It's wonderful. It's a really it's a really transformative experience to be surrounded by those people that really, really believe in a global community and really want to help people to sort of get out of their own culture and experience new ones. Yeah.
Well, we're very lucky that you're here, and also it's really important for the students because they're all here because they want to improve how they communicate their research. But I also think it's important for them to understand just how the media and journalism functions and what journalists are looking for. and how maybe, some of them may go on to have academic careers, some may go out into professional business, etc. But they still need to it's really helpful to understand how the media landscape is being transformed. And I think you're right at the heart of actually this transformation through the project 360 Info. So firstly, your background and your insights on what's working within the media and how it's changing are really, really helpful for this group of students. And so I think, we're just looking forward to your presentation. And as soon as you're ready, we'll be happy.
Yeah. I'll preface this by saying that this is a presentation that was developed by my boss, Andrew Jaspin, who is a big player in the Australian, Southeast Asian media landscape. He founded a website called The Conversation, which some of you may know about, and then he went on to found this project. So the presentation has been slightly outdated. I've updated it a little bit, and I've also removed a few slides to leave extra time at the end to have more of an informal conversation with you about how you can go about getting your research out into the world and engaging with the media and why that's such an important thing to do. So I'll try and keep it relatively quick so you don't get too bored, and then we can move on to the fun part, which is where you get to ask direct questions, and I can try and help you with what you're actually interested in. All right, well, let me share my screen. Give me 2 seconds. There we go. Tell me when you can see it.
Yep. Just need.
Yep. And now I just need to turn it into a slideshow.
Yeah. Perfect.
Is that all good?
Yep.
All right. So look, the aim of this presentation is to give you a little overview of the state of the media globally, but particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. Explain what's gone wrong and the problems that it's caused, and also explain some potential solutions to some of these problems. So I think most kind of experts will agree that the mainstream media and mainstream journalism has reached a crisis point. In the past 15 years, we've seen a steep rise in misinformation, unethical journalism practice, and therefore a growing mistrust and disengagement from the conventional media sources. Low quality information is more abundant and widespread than ever before, and many people just don't want to engage with the media anymore. The thing that we really need, which is high quality evidence-based information about crucial slow burn issues, just isn't really out there. So a little background, how did this happen? A lot of people believe that it started in about 2008, about 15 years ago now, when there was a global recession. And one of the effects of that global recession was that the advertising revenues that media organizations were dependent on to fund their operations were cut by 50%. And because there just wasn't the funding anymore, they had no option but to cut costs. So they started firing journalists, a trend which is continued today. Recently, we saw Vice Media and BuzzFeed go under, which is just the latest of so many other media organizations that haven't managed to survive. And not only did they fire a lot of journalists, but they were forced to pay journalists less, which means that a lot of very experienced journalists could no longer afford to keep doing that kind of work. They moved into other fields like academia, the law, and the only people left in the newsrooms were these very young, hardworking and talented, but really inexperienced journalists who were happy to work for much cheaper. And that meant that the quality and the depth of the content that was coming out of these big global newsrooms really started to suffer and to really diminish. To adapt to these things, the attitude in newsrooms just really changed from one of a commitment to excellence and to really sort of pursuing the stories behind the stories, to just really filling column inches, to just doing things as quickly as possible, and just to get the story out. And so some really disturbing trends started to emerge as all these pressures started to hit newsrooms, and some unethical behaviours started to emerge, like phone hacking, paying for stories, corruption, and then, of course, the rise of the Murdoch media empire that really focused on profits over quality content, that focused on truth and integrity and balance. And you could say the same about other media outlets on the other side of politics. It wasn't just the Murdochs, they're just a very good example of it. And anyone who's watched Succession, which is a big hit in Australia and a big hit in America, might have got some insight into the inner workings of that. So because all these big old players, traditional news organisations, were no longer making great content and no longer able to provide that to people, and the rise of the internet was also full speed around this point as well, there was what some people called a democratization of the media, but other people saw as a real problem. The internet removed all barriers and all gatekeeping to publication. Anyone can produce anything they want without it having to be verified or fact-checked or even have correct spelling and grammar, which is the least of our worries, really. And into that vacuum, there were content farms who were just advertising revenue funded producers of cheap and crappy content, PR companies who have a very vested interest in the type of content that they get out there, whether it's political or whether it's commercial. And then, of course, social media, which is the primary way that people access all of their content now. So obviously TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And in China, obviously, the social media platforms that are native to that region as well. And now, this year in particular, there's an additional challenge, which is the rise of artificial intelligence, such as ChatGPT and Bard. And when you get information from there, you have absolutely no way of knowing where that information's come from, how you can verify it. There's no sources, there's no references, there's no citations. You just take it as if it were truth, but you have no way of knowing whether or not it is or it isn't. So the big problem, there are a lot of problems with this, whether it's mental health problems for young people that are addicted to social media, or whether it's short attention spans, or whether it's the blurring of news and entertainment. There are so many that you could never list them all, but the one that I really wanted to focus on was misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. So these are bad types of information that are either deliberately created to harm people or to get a particular political or commercial interest fulfilled, or information that is just it's not created with the intention of causing harm, but it can be used to inflict harm, or just sort of, poor quality information. So people just have no way of knowing what type of information it is they're consuming. And there's a lot of very problematic information out there, as everyone will have seen in the last few years, whether it's about COVID or whether it's about racial, ethnic, gender minorities. There's a lot of really troubling trends out there in the information landscape. What this is doing is creating an enormous and increasing distrust in the media, which is creating polarization and division. People just aren't really communicating with one another in the way that they used to. And it's creating real social problems and social unrest, because people don't trust each other. They don't trust institutions. They're really polarized against one another, and that creates all manner of social problems. The other big problem is that the place where, going back to the traditional media, when you look at where the traditional media is sort of most active, it mainly comes from the global north. So 70% of the world's media information comes from the global north. There's agencies in the US, the UK, and France. And so large parts of the world just aren't getting quality information from traditional news sources at all. And so there's a lot of viewpoints and a lot of perspectives from the global south that are completely ignored in the mainstream media puzzle, because the voices and the people that control those existing legacy media companies are all in the global north. And so that's a very depressing picture and a very disheartening picture. And there's a lot of despair and a lot of anger amongst people about where could you possibly go in a context like that. It seems like the problems sort of just run away, and it's hard to know how you would possibly fix it. I think that what is needed is a systemic rethink of the way that we make and disseminate information, because the option of returning to old-fashioned journalism, it's too late. It's gotten away from us. We're never going to go back to those old media models. And some people would suggest that that wouldn't be a good idea anyway. So now, one suggestion for how we could fix this problem is to turn to universities as a potential way to fill that information gap, to reconnect and engage with civil society through a more strategic repositioning and replacing the universities at the heart of this new information ecosystem as purveyors of high quality trusted information with a global perspective, not just a Western perspective. And the reason for this is that universities have a lot of qualities that nobody else, no other institution really has. They have, for hundreds or thousands of years even, had at their core the pursuit of truth. They are focused on doing research without fear or favour, fact-checking and peer reviewing information, and they have a very deep knowledge base, unlike most other institutions that are very focused on a particular area. It's now a big sort of focus on deep and multidisciplinary research. They're also still quite trusted. According to a 2023 Edelman Trust Barometer survey, universities still have a trust rating of around 71%. And this compares to about 50% in the media. So half of all people just don't trust the media at all globally, but still 71% of people do trust universities. You could say that's not really high enough, but it's still much, much higher than the number of people that trust the media. And they do recognize that an expert is generally a better source of knowledge than just a commentator in the media. So how can universities address these big problems of misinformation, misaligned information, and missing information? There's sort of three different pieces of the puzzle that are really missing in the global media conversation. Well, firstly, there's misinformation. Universities can refocus research on the world's large and complex challenges. They can become knowledge wholesalers by working with the media and switch their focus from academic publishing, which has been the traditional way to get your research out into the world, to taking a broader view and actually working with the media to get that research out there. Then there's the misalignment problem. What can be done about that one? And I think that they need to connect with the rest of the world. They need to move outside national silos, and they need to create a global international network of academics and journalists and like-minded others to disseminate high-quality information analysis and commit to addressing the big picture problems and the deeper problems that there are in the world. And that brings me to 360 Info, which is what I am doing my small part in trying to achieve this goal, which is basically, to keep it very short, 360 Info is a collaboration between universities all around the world and journalists all around the world. So we're a team of editors that works with university academics to commission and produce news articles that address the world's biggest challenges. And then we disseminate those articles to news providers all around the Indo-Pacific region. Eventually, we aim to be more global and engage more with North America, Africa, South America, but at the moment, it's still focused on the Indo-Pacific region. And we believe that that populates the information ecosystem with research-driven, trusted information that can be verified quite easily, and that can actually start trying to change the dialogue in some ways. So that is my little talk. I've got, hang on, what have I got? The last little bit. Yeah, and we just hope to sort of further develop the potential with universities all around the world to sort of get the groundbreaking research of universities out into the global conversation and from news websites back into just the general population, and hope to make a small difference in addressing the big problem with misinformation. So that's me. Did anybody have any questions about that?
Well, first of all, thank you, and for a really interesting overview of some of the big challenges facing journalism right now. I'm not sure whether the students were aware of these challenges. It'd be interesting to get some of their reflections. I mean, I've heard this presentation before, and I see also updated certain aspects of it as well. And I think, you know, there's a few things. There's one is like what's going on in journalism, and then there's what's going on in universities.
Yeah.
There's not necessarily, the two things aren't really meeting yet. So it's quite curious, because I actually totally agree with the idea that universities should be, and academics overall, should be much more engaged with what's going on in society. But I'm not sure that all academics believe that to be the case. And I actually feel that there's quite a large number of academics who are somewhat intimidated by putting their work out for the world to see. They're really happy to have their peers engage with their work and to get feedback and criticism from their peers, but they're really, really concerned when they put something out and it's there, everyone can see it. And they'd rather not do that. They'd rather actually sort of stay within the ivory tower. So I think, you know, one of the big challenges you have is the journalism paradigm is problematic, but so is the university.
Well, and I can understand why. I mean, having worked in academic publishing for so long, I can see exactly why there's so much reluctance to engage in that process. One of them is that it's just more free labor. I mean, university academics are so overworked, and they're expected as part of their career progression to publish, but they're not really paid to do that work. They're not even paid to engage in peer review. And so I can understand that there's a lot of resentment around anyone, particularly academic publishers, who are seen to profit from all this free labor. That's one of the problems, is just that there's not enough time in a researcher's life to do all this extra unpaid work. And the other thing is that there's an understandable reluctance to contribute to this quite exploitative system of getting academic publishers rich through your free labor. There was a thing that came out where I think Elsevier in 2022 made $5.2 billion, and they made that money by getting academics to do free work. So I can understand why people are annoyed with the imperative to publish. That's one thing. The other thing is that they're very different skill sets. A journalist is a storyteller. They are people that work with words and stories and narratives. They are engaging in these very broad but potentially shallow conversations, whereas a researcher is by definition someone who's very excited to go deep into an issue and to get very into the details and to focus on the research rather than the way that that's communicated. So there's just a difference in the type of skills that are required to be a researcher and the type of skills that are required to be an academic. A journalist. And there is just a bit of tension there. And, we see it all the time, but I believe it can absolutely be bridged. But there's some of the reasons that I think, and then there's just personalities. Journalists are often more kind of, they're gregarious. They're sort of, they just think differently and act differently. So people that are drawn to academia are, very clever and very hardworking and very thoughtful sometimes, a lot of the time, and it's just not on their mind. So it makes sense to me that that would be a barrier.
Yeah, I want to give the students a chance to comment, but there is actually one book that we use on this course introduced on this course by Nancy Barron. It's called Escape from the Ivory Tower. And basically, and she's encouraging academics to engage more. And she says, and this, I don't know, it's a real hard rule of thumb, but she says that some of the most successful academics, and her definition is not success based on number of citations, but successful overall, spend 50% of their time on the research and 50% communicating that.
Yeah.
Through various forms. Maybe it's writing editorials, it's engaging in presentations and so on. And she says that more and more academics are moving in that direction, or recognizing that they have to move in that direction. And so, maybe it's the timing is good, because the academics realize that, yes, they need to change their model in order for society to really continue to trust universities, and also to think that universities are worth the investment.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I've seen at the sort of more management level in universities, at least in Australia and I think Southeast Asia as well, there is definitely a shift in focus. Every strategic plan for a big international university now has research impact as one of its key KPIs, really. And so they are very aware that to keep getting the funding that they get and keep the sort of trust that they have to demonstrate to people outside of universities that the work that they're doing is important and that it's valuable. And that's happening a lot more than it used to, I think.
Great. So would anybody like to ask questions or comments, reflections? Dongjing, do you have some comments? Oh, okay. Kevin, let's start with Kevin.
Yeah, I just so you said the thing about like academics need to like be more connected with journalists, but I also have this idea that when you watch a lot of news is like disseminated through like social media and stuff, and when you look at things like TikTok, the people who are the most successful at getting information out are both academics and also good teachers kind of people. Like people like Hank Green is one that comes to mind very like easily. And so I'm just wondering, like, what kind of like how can the gap be bridged between academics, journalists, and also like teaching that information as well, because it's not just about getting it out there. People also have to kind of understand it.
Yeah, so that's a great question and a sort of big existential question, I think. Look, there's a few ways as an individual that you can do it. One is by just going all in and becoming an influencer, which takes a lot of time and resources. There's a lot of research around what it takes to be a successful influencer, but basically you have to be creating content every day. And it has to be not polished the way that it used to be. I think in the old days, it used to have very high production values, whereas now it can be very raw. And in fact, it's better if it's raw, because that's the TikTok formula. That's the YouTube formula. It's sort of direct, it's personal, it's raw. But it takes a really long time still to create that content. And so if you want to go all in and become an influencer, you're going to have to really scale back your research to make time to do that, because you've got to create the content. You have to moderate it as well, because that's the other thing that can happen. It can sort of if it goes viral, if you're lucky enough for it to go viral, you have no control over where it appears or how people are engaging with it. And it can create a lot of problems for you that you then have to have the time and the emotional energy to find the time. Yeah, you have to find those resources to commit to that. So it seems pretty easy, like you just get your phone, do a 30-second TikTok, but it's actually not. It's actually a very time-consuming thing to do. So there's that. The other thing is that, so that's one path that you could take, is to go all in and become an influencer. The other thing to keep in mind is that journalists and media organizations are all on social media now. Like, they all understand that that's the primary way that most people, particularly young people, particularly, it depends on which country you are, which type of social media you'll be using, but everyone understands that that's how you get it out there. So every news organization will have a TikTok account and a YouTube account and a Twitter account, and they'll be engaging that way anyway, and they are much better resourced to do that work. They have a team of social media producers and moderators and video producers and, you know, lawyers that can assist when things get really messy. So I think it's not really an either or. If you want to get onto social media, if you go through the media, you will, your stuff and your name will be on social media anyway, because it all appears there now. Does that answer the question, or?
Yeah, thank you.
No worries.
Okay, maybe anyone else would like to make a comment? I was approaching Dongjin. Maybe you have some comments or reflections.
Thank you so much, Ilaria. I really loved your presentation. So I'm writing a book right now on, how to present more, ethical stories, especially from local to global. I think I've been I learned so much from your presentation on how universities can address those problems, but I'm very self-conflicted. It's basically a paradox. Even though I feel myself, I try to serve as a bridge between the public and the academic world. But it's just my own self-criticism and challenge. And I think that my first point is that as an academic, I am extremely biased. I can see that. Well, I can only speak on behalf of someone who's doing more social science and humanity-based work, and I also speak to scientists too. We're basically producing research as pieces of a whole in time. Like the research questions or hypotheses we're exploring are on the way. So we are exploring a problem really in a very depth. However, the public, when they look at news, they want assurance, right? They want a certainty, but we can't tell them we are really sure about this.
Yeah. No, and
right?
that's a great point. And I think we saw that a lot in COVID. People just
Yeah.
didn't understand how science works. They didn't understand that when you get more information, the hypothesis can be disproven, and then you move on to the next field of inquiry. I think that has been a very difficult thing to communicate to people outside of academia, that the scientific method is by definition always changing and always evolving. In terms of the issue of bias, I think that I agree with you. I mean, this is maybe a very postmodern thing to say, but I think that everyone has some kind of bias. The idea that there's some kind of universal truth, particularly in the social sciences, no one really believes that anymore. But I think the best that you can do is declare your funding sources, declare your biases, explain your methodologies, say how you got to those conclusions, make your research transparent. Don't try to conceal the fact that you have done things in a particular way, or that you have a particular reason for doing them in that way. And I think that's sort of the best that you can do, is just really declare very transparently what any of your interests or biases are, And then, but you're right. I mean, there is a very, there's a drive towards simplification that is challenging.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. I feel in humanities and social science now it's very much a trend to disclose or to be accountable and be transparent. But I'm not quite sure about how scientists deal with that. Because at my university we have a huge number of scientists. When I just spoke with them during the lunch breaks, I'm not very sure how brave they are to disclose, their biases and and this not just biases. I would say their choices. How they make choices about
Yep.
their data. So yeah, that's something I find it really interesting after moving to Shanghai. Yeah, well, just the second point, really, I reflected on the intercultural or international differences. I feel in China, university professors are generally very trustworthy to the public. However, in the US, because I've been living and working in the US before last year, um, in the US, especially in the last 5 years, universities are considered as producing liberal and lefty professors. It's really dichotomized. And I was accused every year as if I was brainwashing students. I'm not saying the whole public, but it's there. A large number of parents and students, they were uh, posting very harmful, I would say harmful information on Twitter,
Yep.
accusing the university professors. I can't know how many of the public can agree with that, but I was thinking about how a certain discursive context or social cultural context can dictate certain information, or could even change the story. So that's something myself I've been struggling a lot. How to transform the realities we engage from the local to the global level. It's just an academic challenge. As I'm sure it's also a journalistic challenge. Yeah.
Well, look, I think that is such a good and important point, and I've thought about it a lot. I haven't properly researched it from an academic point of view, but from a personal level, I see it as just a global populist trend to just diminished faith in all institutions, including universities. And that's a real cultural movement that, at its core has a reactionary, well, it's a response against the elitism, and it's a response against the sort of tightly kept, tightly guarded power of elites, particularly in America, and how that has not worked for the majority of Americans. And so they have kind of almost, you say in English, thrown the baby out with the bathwater. They say, we don't trust anyone in a position of authority. We don't trust politicians. We don't trust experts. We don't trust universities. And that is a really big and, I think, concerning kind of cultural movement. So that's a different point about translating knowledge from the local to the international level. I still think that transparency, research ethics, acknowledging funding sources, acknowledging bias, they are still at the heart of how you build trust and solve that problem. But it's a big problem, and I don't think anyone's really worked out the exact solution to it yet.
Thank you.
Great. Any comments from the students? Okay, Kevin again.
It just got me thinking a little bit, the comment about how the public wants like definitive like answers and stuff, and it's just often like the way I see it is like the way that people like consume news and stuff is generally through headlines. Like headlines are super important, headlines and titles. Like an example is if there's like a YouTube video and the title is like really inflammatory, you're gonna click it. If it's like something like, there's this new hypothesis or something, like I'm just wondering, is there like a way like to balance making it really like clickbaity, I guess, and also make it honest? Because a lot of times that's like a big struggle that I think could happen.
It's an enormous struggle, and that's a really big change in just behavior that's been brought about by the way that the platforms operate and the way that the algorithms that power these platforms reward particular types of behavior. So look, basically all of those social media platforms have a key metric, which is time on platform. It's a fight for attention. The way they measure success is how long you stay there, how many seconds you watch a video, how long overall you've been on that platform. They want your time. And the reason that they want your time is because a lot of them are still powered by advertising revenue. So the more time you spend on the platform, the more they can charge advertisers for a piece of your attention. So what's happened as a response is that those platforms, particularly TikTok's a really interesting one because it's 30 seconds. It's just such short videos, and headlines likewise. I think Twitter was the one that really changed things from a long read to 160 characters. People want to get as much information as they can out of a headline. Media organizations really struggle with it because they have to play in that space where there is a fight for attention, and they need to get your attention as well. In terms of how you sort of solve that, at 360 Info, we do have to keep things short. Our articles are 1,000 words, but we always link to the paper that has, there's links throughout that take you to the source of the claim, or the source of the information. The data is all publicly available. I mean, again, there's no definitive answer, but there are ways that you can make it a little bit less sort of presenting something as if it's true when it's a hypothesis or when it's an opinion. Yeah.
Sounds like a lot of the problems are like based in like advertising revenue and stuff. So
well, and data mining as well, which is a sort of slightly different problem. But it's similar to what it's always been. It's a fight for the amount of time you spend on the platform. And there's a monetary incentive for those companies to want your time. Yeah.
It's interesting. I don't think it's necessarily a huge change for academics. It's in a sense, so the priority for the academic is to get the journal article published and then to get citations. But then they stop. So that the article is published and, oh yeah, job well done. Now go on to my next article and my next research project. But that's actually when the work should begin.
Yeah.
And that's where 360 Info is really valuable because it can help the academic disseminate their work much more effectively, that and Conversation and other similar platforms. And so more academics need to just recognize that the journal article isn't the end point. And then they can use that journal article as a way to engage more effectively. So just tweaking that a little bit can make a huge difference. And also just recognizing, that journal articles are behind paywalls in many instances, so people aren't finding out what the scientist is talking about due to that fact. So they also have an obligation to do that. And so universities then could say, well, actually what we want is not just citations, but we want to see you really, and I think we talked about it earlier about the research impact being really important. So I think with those tweaks, we should start seeing more and more academics engaging more extensively with different platforms. Well, that's what we would like to see. I think also you have to get the university's overall sort of communications approach changed a little bit, because there's this tendency to see the way forward is to put out a press release about the findings from a particular research project. But as you said, there's no journalist to receive the press release. So it just gets sent out to wherever it is, and then there's no science editor there who's going to engage with it. So actually, and I mean, I'm involved in discussions here at the university, but the communications people just see press releases as the be all and end all. And they have outside of their office, they have this thing out. We've sent out 150 press releases so far this year. And I'm thinking, no, I'm not sure that's working very well. You have a little bit more sophisticated approach to university communication. But I don't think it's a massive transformation. I think it's about tweaking priorities and recognizing what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's also it's a bit of a multifaceted thing. I don't think that you can just do one thing anymore. I think that if I wanted to get my name out there a bit more or my research out, I would have a social media presence, and I would be writing book chapters and journal articles and working with the press office to get stuff out there. It's a few different things all at once. Yeah,
so it's actually recognizing that, and I'm not sure that most academics do recognize that yet. I'm sure the students taking this course appreciate it, because that's why they're taking the course, because they want to understand how to be more effective there. The other thing actually is that the social media world is quite nasty. I mean, it is really nasty now.
Yeah.
And there is actually a fantastic professor at University College London who I follow. His name is Mark Maslin, and he communicates on climate change. But whenever he posts anything, the amount of trolling he gets is just extraordinary. And you can see he'll reply to the first one, but then he just gives up after that. And then you just see all of this people saying, well, how can you say climate change is for real, blah, 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 blah. It's all the same stuff. And I just wonder, where does he get the motivation from to keep?
Yeah. And that's a problem, not just for academics. We recently in Australia had a very high profile Indigenous Aboriginal man who was one of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation's most big names. And he just quit after years and years and years in the industry because he was just attacked, just racially, just attacked and attacked and attacked until it just got too much and he couldn't do it. And media organizations don't usually do enough to protect their sort of talent, particularly their diverse talent and their women, their gender diverse talent from, succumbing to the brutality of what it takes to be a public figure on social media.
So on the big picture, why do you think Monash is supporting this initiative?
360? Well, because they understand on a very deep level that the future of universities and the future of research is very entwined with being able to communicate the importance of that to people outside the universities. It is a bit of a threatening time for universities for all the reasons that DJ mentioned. There is a movement against expertise. There is this perception that researchers are only really doing things that benefit their colleagues within the ivory tower. And I think there's a really big push in most countries to change that and to re-establish the university as a very important social institution and a hub of knowledge. And I think people understand that if they can't convince the broader public that what they're doing is important and worthwhile, then they're really at a risk of losing funding, losing students, and just losing respect, because it's a very concerning time, I guess, culturally all around the world for experts and for brokers of knowledge and expertise.
And with regards to the current, I mean, we should say that it's a pilot project at this stage.
It's only a year old, yeah.
And the idea is that you'll learn as you go.
Yeah.
So there's a few things. It's just how do you know that you're reaching people?
Yeah.
And particularly because you have we have the model of a 1,000-word article, but
Yep.
the question would be like, who is that actually aimed at? And and then the big problem we have is that they say that the attention spans are going down, and also the younger generation aren't necessarily at the places where maybe your content is going. So it's like, where do you see your audience, or the audience for 360, and how do you know you're reaching them effectively?
Yep. So the audience is primarily news editors all around the Indo-Pacific region. That's the primary audience. And the secondary audience is that news editor's audience. So we have to create things that the news editor is going to look at and say, yep, I'm going to publish this because I know my readers will want to see it. So that's who the audience is. We know that we're reaching the audience because we can track the number of times that each of our articles gets picked up and republished. So on average, that's between 7 and 42 times. It will be published in different publications across the region, from the Times of India, the Straits Times, the Canberra Morning Post or whatever, Jakarta Post. What we can't track is how many people read those articles in those places, because we don't have access to their metrics. We can, if we put a post on social media, we can see how that performs, but that's not our primary distribution model. That's a secondary distribution model. Yeah.
So you will never be able to get the demographics.
Well, we know that the potential readership is 300 million people. That's how many people read the publications that republish our stuff. So we know that's who's looking at those publications. We know that each article is getting picked up between 7 and 42 times. We don't know how many times that's been read, like each article, how many times that's been read by the end user. So we can't track that. We know that where it is mainly in India, partly because it's got a huge population and a very active media market, and Southeast Asia. We publish in English as well, so that that cuts out certain populations, although that will change as AI gets better at translating quickly. And we can tell because we just sort of get more and more subscribers every week and every month. So we sort of know that it's increasing. And we're getting more and more people wanting to publish with us, which means that they've probably heard from someone else that, they published an article with us and it, got published in all the right places. But yeah, and this is a thing that, most wire services would have as well. They would only ever be able to know who was picking up their content, but then they wouldn't necessarily have access to the metrics around how many times it was being read in each separate place.
So that right now it's the pilot Asia Pacific region, isn't it?
Yeah, Indo-Pacific. Yeah. So India, China, we sort of don't play actively in because it's such a complex media market, and because of the censorship, they just wouldn't publish a lot of our stuff. Well, it would be hard to get our stuff picked up a lot in China just because of how that media market works. But yeah, we're talking to people in Denmark and a few other places in Europe. The aim is to set up a hub in Suva in Fiji to get more traction in the Pacific, and in Nairobi in Kenya to get a footprint there, and then North America and South America as well. But yeah, we're focused on the Indo-Pacific for now because that's where we've had the most success in getting pickup, and also just because of where our staff is located. Yeah.
And could you imagine, I'm sorry, again, I'm kind of asking a lot of questions, but could you imagine the format changing at all?
Well, we're definitely focusing a lot more on types of content that we know the audience wants. So video, every special report now has a explainer video component, and data visualizations are also the other one that we're really focused on.
Great. Fantastic. Anyone else got any comments or questions? Some of you, a lot of you have been very quiet. Shihab, are you okay? You generally have some questions or comments and reflections. Do you feel like
I don't really have a question, but I mean, I just agree to the points that does social media affect many things in life? Yeah.
you feel like as an academic, you maybe should be thinking more about how you communicate your work using, collaborating with journalism or looking at different channels?
Yeah, I guess so. It's a bit complicated to actually to really know more about publishing. And since it's not really my field, but I do understand the struggle that many journalists is facing. Yeah.
How about any of our students from China? Any comments or reflections on, as we said, it seems the Chinese media world is a little bit different, quite challenging, but anyone have any comments? Irene, how about you?
I don't have a question, but I do have a struggle that I was reminded of a struggle that I'm facing by the question just put forward by Kevin. And we are in universities, we are always encouraged to do a presentation that include a lot of scientific results and details. And sometimes I also face this struggle between the scientific details and a story that that can be understood by many other people. My supervisor always tells me that you need to tell a story when you are doing a scientific research. But I'm also required to focus on a lot of details when I'm doing presentations. So it is actually a dilemma we are facing right now, like when I'm doing the scientific research.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I think it's kind of good that I just think that it's difficult to ask researchers to become journalists because they're not journalists. Like, we need people that do understand the details and that care about the details as well, which is why, as a service, we try to make it really easy for our researchers. So we will often just say, look, send me your most recent journal article and I will write the piece for you, just because we know that side of it and they know the research side of it. And so, us and the conversation will take some of that work away from the researcher, and the university press office can often help as well, in terms of getting it out there. I don't know what it's like at Osaka, but yeah, but look, it's a difficult one. I would hate it if all researchers started seeing themselves as social media producers first and foremost, because that's not the role of a researcher. Like, society needs you to be doing the research properly and to be focusing on the details, because yeah, it would be quite disastrous if you always had in mind how to try to sell the story. But it's a balance. It's a fine balance is all I can say. But there is help, there are people that, you can engage with, and we're obviously very happy to help, but I'd suggest collaborating with people that have more expertise in that area as a start, as you build up your own kind of media chops. Chops is an Australian word, but, media experience and literacy and expertise. Yeah.
But the academics should see it as a learning opportunity, I think.
It's a very important skill. I mean, I just think it depends on what you want to do. If your aim is not to eventually be a professor, or but if you're an ambitious sort of person, regardless of whether you want to be a professor or not, you don't really have a choice. Like, you'll have to you will have to be able to demonstrate the relevance of your work to other people outside of your area and outside of your institution. That's a skill that as you sort of develop, you just have no choice but to learn, really, or you'll get quite stuck at the level that you're at.
Maybe that's a good place to end. Unless anyone else has any additional comments or questions. Some of you have been very quiet. Okay, well, I'm not seeing anybody raising their hands, so maybe we can virtually thank Ilaria for a really wonderful presentation and the opportunity to talk to you and to hear your thoughts on this topic. It's been really excellent. I've enjoyed it immensely, and I think it's a great opportunity for the students as well. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you all. It was so wonderful to meet you all. And all the very best of luck with your work and with getting it out into the media, and also best of luck with the actual research component too. All right. Lovely to meet you all.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Bye.
Great. Thank you, everybody. See you all next week. Next week is the More Than Research game, so we'll be sending an email about that. Okay, thanks for joining. We're a little bit early, but that's totally fine. And thank you, Dongjing, for joining us. I hope you found it interesting.
Yeah, it's a very good, way for me to understand what 360 has been doing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. Because you tend to feel like, oh yeah, the media world is going fine and so on, but it's not. It's really in quite a difficult situation, and so it's not quite simply about, well, if I write an article, I'll be successful as an academic. It's really get it, understand what's going on and plug into that. So it's great to hear from somebody dealing with those issues firsthand.